Welcome to the Unfading Truth Bible reading plan. Today we're reading Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. Grace and faith are free gifts, and they're worthy of your deepest gratitude. Ephesians chapter 2, I hope that these words are familiar to you. As for you, you were dead in your transgressions and sins, in which you used to live when you followed the ways of this world and of the ruler of the kingdom of the air, the Spirit who is now at work in those who are disobedient. All of us also lived among them at one time, gratifying the cravings of our flesh and following its desires and thoughts. Like the rest, we were by nature deserving of wrath. But because of His great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in our transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved. And God raised us up with Christ and seated us with Him in the heavenly realms in Christ Jesus, in order that in the coming ages He might show the incomparable riches of His grace expressed in His kindness to us in Christ Jesus. For it is by grace you have been saved through faith, and this not from yourselves. It is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. For we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Well, this week, as we work our way through article number 5 of point 1 of the Canons of Dort, looking at God's unconditional election, we're looking to find out the sources of unbelief and then the sources of faith. We've already spent time this week understanding that the cause or blame for unbelief and sins is not with God, but it's with us. For the remainder of the week, we're going to come to understand that faith in Jesus Christ and salvation through Him is a free gift of God. Well, this is the first of what will be likely several times this year that we come to the familiar, amazing passage that we just read. And these words are so endearing and powerful because in just a few sentences, they communicate the life-restoring effect that the gospel has. There is no life outside of Christ, spiritually at least. Paul frames it ironically. He writes, you were dead in your transgressions and sins in which you used to live. Do you see that? You were dead the way that you used to live. Everywhere you look, people are living and breathing and carrying on with the busyness of life. But yet spiritually they're dead. They just methodically follow the ways of this world and its rulers as they gratify the cravings of their flesh, or sarx. As we've been reminded by the canons these last few days, we cannot blame God for this spiritual deadness. It stems fully from our sin and willful disobedience. Since we've rebelliously wandered so far from God's good design, well, it only makes sense that we were by nature deserving of His wrath. The good news is that even though we fully deserved this deadness which we brought upon ourselves, God made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. That's the very definition of grace. Let's dig a little bit deeper. Now, if you haven't already, you really need to memorize verses 8 and 9, as they form one of the clearest explanations of salvation ever written. Those verses start off this way: for it is by grace. Understand that grace is the gift of undeserved kindness. Instead of receiving the wrath that we deserve, well, God gives us new life in Christ. For it is by grace that you have been saved. Notice here the past tense. It doesn't promise that someday, if you clean up your act and behave, you might be or even will be saved. It says that you already have been saved. And it goes on to say that this salvation comes through faith. You're not just a passive recipient of saving grace. You must exercise faith. But Paul goes on to say next that this faith, that doesn't come from you yourself. No, that faith is a gift of God. Really, both God's grace and the faith necessary for you to receive it are freely given to you by Him. And then he wants us to understand that none of this comes by our own works. Otherwise, we would be able to boast about it. You did nothing to earn your salvation. The good works that you now do, those very same works that God prepared in advance for you to do, well, they're simply a token of your gratitude for His free gift of salvation to you. Well, as you pray today, use the AAA prayer pattern. That's where you begin your prayer by acknowledging who God is. Today, open your prayer to our Father, who raised us up with Christ and seated us with Him in the heavenly realms. Then as you pray, go on to align your life with God's will. Pray that as you increasingly understand the value of God's gift of grace and faith, you will increasingly respond with good works in gratitude for this gift. Then you can ask God for what it is that you need. Remember, everything else that you hear today will fade away, but the word of the Lord is unfading truth.